What's going on, everybody? Cleopas Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at the Cricket Dream 5G for probably the last time on this channel, and going over whether or not it's still a good phone to buy in 2023. Now, when this phone was originally released in late 2021, it actually was a pretty impressive budget offering from Cricket, with a really large display, features like NFC and wireless charging, and pretty good performance too. It really had a lot going for it that was pretty impressive for the price range. But the real question is, in 2023, almost 2 years later, is it still worth buying? Well, we're about to find out. Now, as always, if you want to learn more about this phone, including information about pricing, availability, and the best accessories for it, definitely check out the various links in the video description. But otherwise, let's get right into it. So like I said before, the Cricket Dream 5G does have a really large display, with a 6.82-inch LCD display that has a 720p resolution and a 20.5:9 aspect ratio. If you're doing something like reading or web browsing, for example, on a larger display like this, of course, things are going to be quite a bit easier to see. So if you're going to be on your phone a lot, this is definitely going to be a good thing. And when it comes to consuming content and stuff like that, that taller form factor this phone has is definitely a good thing too. Because if you're doing something in landscape mode, for example, like watching a video or playing a game, things are going to look a bit nicer, more cinematic. You're going to get a more immersive kind of experience. And then for vertical things like web browsing and social media, for example, with this kind of aspect ratio, you'll be able to fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, the size and dimensions we're getting with the Cricket Dream 5G are great. That being said though, when it comes to image quality, that's sort of a different story. We are only getting a 720p resolution here, which on one hand, even today, there are plenty of entry-level 5G phones that still only have 720p resolutions. But the thing is, I feel like those ones look a lot better. With the Cricket Dream 5G, it's not terrible per se, but looking at this image quality, if you're watching videos for hours, for example, I feel like you can do a lot better. I mean, even comparing this to something like the Samsung Galaxy A03s, even a phone like that that's technically even lower end than this is still going to have a slightly better image quality. So on one hand, for more basic activities like reading and web browsing, because of the size and dimensions we're getting here, I do think this phone is going to be pretty good for that kind of thing. But again, for stuff like watching videos, looking at photos, maybe even some types of social media where you really want the image to look nice, if you're really going to be using your phone for a lot of that, I definitely think you can do better. Now, when it comes to storage with this phone, we're getting 64 gigabytes of internal storage with microSD card expansion, which at this point in 2023 is pretty average for an entry-level 5G phone. For the average user, I do think it's going to be at least acceptable as long as you're mindful of what you're putting on your phone. You're not constantly downloading a bunch of apps and games and stuff, and you make sure to use a microSD card whenever you can. But if you are more of a power user, then you might want to go with something that has 128 instead. But even then, keep in mind, this phone retails for just under $200. I think it was like $189 when it first came out. And first of all, I seriously doubt anyone's going to be paying full price for it at this point. And second of all, even if you did pay full price for it, at this point in 2023, while we are starting to see more and more phones that have a bunch of storage, we haven't quite gotten to the point where you can easily find a phone that has 128 gigabytes of storage for under $200. So in general, the bottom line here is, although the Cricket Dream 5G does have a pretty average amount of storage, that's most likely not going to be enough for a real power user. In this price range, especially with Cricket, it's pretty unlikely you're actually going to do any better. Now for security features, unfortunately we're not getting Face Unlock with this phone, but it does have a fingerprint scanner on the back. So of course, whether or not this is a big deal completely depends on whether or not you use Face Unlock. If you don't, then at least it does have a fingerprint scanner, so you can pretty much ignore this. But if you do, keep in mind in 2023, pretty much any 5G phone is going to have both a fingerprint scanner and Face Unlock. So if you really do want Face Unlock, then again, keep in mind most similar phones to this are going to have it. But at least the fingerprint scanner is real fast and responsive, no issues at all, so that's definitely a good thing. Now taking a look at the camera setup here, for the front facing camera, we got a typical water drop notch. I want to say almost every phone in this price range has pretty much the exact same design. This camera is 13 megapixels, so not bad. Then on the back, we got a full quad camera setup with a 48 megapixel main camera, an 8 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 2 megapixel macro camera, and a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera. So with such an affordable phone, it's definitely impressive to see a full quad camera setup here. So if you are someone who's taking a lot of photos and you want a wider variety of features, then for what it is, the Cricket Dream 5G is going to be a pretty good choice. Now when it comes to photo quality, I definitely don't think it's bad at all. In fact, for what it is, it's actually pretty impressive. Sure, at this point in 2023, it might not be the absolute best in this price range. There are a couple phones out there that do take slightly better photos, but considering that, again, you're probably not even going to be paying full price for this phone, for more casual use like pictures you're taking for your own memories, stuff like Snapchat where the quality isn't super important, and even the occasional Instagram post every now and then, I do think this phone will definitely get the job done. And as long as your expectations aren't super high, when it comes to the camera here, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. Now when it comes to the RAM and processor, with the Cricket Dream 5G, we're getting 4 gigabytes GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 700 processor. Now I've seen this processor at this point in so many other phones, and honestly I gotta say, for what it is really good. Sure, on one hand this kinda goes without saying, but compared to a mid-range phone like a Samsung Galaxy A53 5G for example, a phone like this is not gonna be nearly as fast. But for a phone you can get for under $200 full price, and realistically it's gonna be way less than that, I really can't complain about the performance we're getting here. For basic activities like web browsing, social media, streaming content like videos and music, and honestly even a lot of mobile gaming, this phone actually does perform surprisingly well, and it doesn't really feel slow either. Now sure, if you're going to be constantly on your device doing all kinds of demanding activities like high performance mobile gaming, stuff like that, it is going to struggle a little. That's definitely not what this phone is made for. But again, for more basic normal activities, I would say for the average things most people are going to be doing with their smartphone, the performance we're getting here is going to be good enough. Now I almost forgot to mention I did run another Geekbench 5 benchmark test on this phone for the 100th time, but here are the scores I got. What I recommend doing is running this test on your current phone and then comparing your results to these, and that's going to give you a better idea of where this phone's performance really stands and whether or not it's going to be an upgrade for you. Now for the battery, the Cricket Dream 5G has a 4750 mAh battery. Cricket isn't exactly clear about the charging power. I think it's like 10 or 15 watts, but in my experience, the charging speed is okay. It's not really that fast. So honestly, if the charging speed is really that important to you, you're probably going to want to go with something else. But in general, for average use, for most people, I feel like it will be at least acceptable. And the other cool thing about this phone when it comes to the battery is, like I kind of mentioned earlier in the video, the Cricket Dream 5G does have wireless charging. So while most likely people aren't really going out of their way to find that feature, considering that mostly only flagship phones have it, it's definitely a nice bonus to get it in a phone like this. But going back to the actual battery itself, with this phone you can definitely expect to get great battery life and longevity. A 4750 mAh battery is not quite 5000, but it still is a really large battery, so if battery life is important to you, then the Cricket Dream 5G is going to be a good choice. Now when it comes to software, that's where this phone really shows its age. With the Cricket Dream 5G, unfortunately we are only getting Android 11, and at this point I seriously doubt there are going to be any major updates. So if having the latest version of Android is important to you, I mean, at this point we're on Android 13, so the Cricket Dream 5G is not even close. So in that situation, if you really want the latest software and the best software support, then I would definitely not recommend getting this phone. On the bright side though, the Cricket Dream 5G does at least have NFC, so if you like to make contactless mobile payments using Tap and Pay, you'll be able to do that with this phone no problem. At this point in 2023, I want to say most phones have NFC now, especially 5G phones, but a lot of these slightly older phones don't, so at least with the Cricket Dream 5G, we're not getting the disadvantage of not having NFC. But in conclusion, is the Cricket Dream 5G still worth buying in 2023? In general, compared to a lot of the newer entry-level 5G phones, I feel like not a whole lot has even changed, and even some things like NFC being more standard for example, really just don't affect the Cricket Dream 5G because this phone had it to begin with. For what it is, I feel like this phone's only two real disadvantages are, first of all, the display quality. On one hand, the size and dimensions are great, but again, the display quality just really leaves a lot to be desired. And at this point, lots of new phones are coming out that are even lower end than this, that still have better looking displays in my opinion. So if you're doing something like watching lots of videos where the image quality really matters a lot, then you might be a little let down here. And then again, the software is pretty old. Having Android 11 at this point, while not being terrible, is still definitely going to be of course a huge disappointment if you're coming in expecting Android 13. But aside from those two things, honestly, if you're looking for a really affordable 5G phone for more basic activities, and you value a larger display, decent performance, a really good camera setup, and features like wireless charging and NFC, then for you, even in 2023, I do think the Cricket Dream 5G will be a pretty good choice. Now, once again, if you want to learn more about this phone, definitely check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about it, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipus Tech on Twitter and Instagram, and as always, I will see you in the next video.